we're live. Okay, good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us on our Edgware United Synagogues Wednesday night live. This is I think our 23rd week that we've been running, and delighted that we have Matthew Offord with us this evening. Matthew was first elected as Member of Parliament for the Hendon constituency in 2010. He was subsequently re-elected in 2015, 17 and 19. Prior to becoming an MP, he worked for the BBC as a political analyst. During that time, he was elected as a councillor in the London Borough of Barnet and went on to become deputy leader of the council. In Parliament, Matthew has raised issues on a diverse range of topics, including foreign policy in relation to Israel, funding for extra school security, local transport issues, notably achieving funding for step-free access at Mill Hill Broadway Station, local policing, fairer funding for local schools, animal welfare concerns, and most recently, fire safety issues and the protection of leaseholders in blocks of flats. Matthew takes a keen interest in environmental matters and has served on the House of Commons Environmental Audit Committee since 2012. Matthew, as well, is a keen sailor, taking part in many races around the UK, not least the annual Commons versus Lords boat race along the River Thames. He is a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society and undertook a 2,000-kilometre exploration of the Libyan desert in 2005. I imagine it was a lot warmer there than it is here today. In 2010, he was awarded a PhD by King's College London. Before I bring you in, Matthew, I'd just like to say if anybody has any questions this evening, if you would post your questions in the chat box, or else if you would show your virtual hand. Please do not wave because we cannot see you, because we are on speaker view. Therefore, the only hands we will see are those which are virtual, which you can get to through your participant section. Good evening, Matthew. Welcome to Edgware, virtually as it is, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, David, and thank you for organising tonight. I'm very grateful that you've taken the time to do so. We're in a very unusual period in our history. And for the last couple of months, I've been doing quite a few Zoom meetings with different organisations. Many years ago, I introduced MP Direct, where we would invite people in certain parts of the constituency to a meeting within the constituency. And the reason for making it very localized was so that people could raise issues that were specific to them. So a broken paving stone in Hendon didn't mean so much to people in Parnell Close, who might have had a broken paving stone there. And the idea was to get around the constituency and talk about specific issues. Over the years, that has changed slightly. We then introduced MP Direct, Parliament Direct, where members of the public came to Parliament. I didn't think they would want to come up, but lots of people did, because afterwards I've given them a tour of the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and they seem to enjoy that. So this is almost an extension of that. It's an opportunity to see as many people as possible, but using the modern technology that is Zoom. And I'm sure that many people here have Zoomed out in the last couple of months, but it has proved, I think, to be effective in keeping contact with people. So I'm grateful for tonight. Now, in Parliament, we're sitting slightly differently. We're only allowed 50 members in the chamber at any time, and that's often cut down to only those who are speaking who are able to go in. So I've taken the opportunity to use Zoom on several occasions to ask questions of the Prime Minister and other members of the government as necessary. But David also mentions my involvement as a member of the Environmental Audit Select Committee. That's something else that we have used Zoom successfully. I had a meeting today and we have another one tomorrow. And so the work of Parliament is continuing. Some people may think, well, you know, what do MPs do now? Well, I don't do the commute on the tube each day, but I certainly do the same things of putting down questions, raising issues with ministers, writing fair amounts of letters, and general correspondence that I have usually. In the last couple of months, we've seen a huge rise in the amount of correspondence and issues that people have raised, which is understandable. A lot of this has centered upon the coronavirus pandemic, but people have had other issues and probably had the time on their hands that they were able to actually engage in an issue that was perhaps bothering them for some time, or become interested in something. And that's been fine. But as I said, Parliament has continued. So not only the select committees continued, but the bill committees for getting legislation through Parliament has continued. So important issues like the Environment Bill has gone through, or is going through. The Agricultural Bill is going through, and other specific bits of legislation that are closely aligned with Brexit are also continuing at a pace. Now, many people will know that the Brexit talks are still continuing, and that's an area that some of us remain very concerned about. We would like to see a deal, but there are particularly stumbling points, particularly over fishing in Northern Ireland. And we're still hopeful that it could be pulled out in the next couple of days, but we're certainly waiting to see what happens with that. And the government have not committed to Parliament rising before an agreement is struck. So we still are very much in that area where there's more work to do, and we remain very hopeful. But there are other important issues have arisen as well. The UK terrorism threat has recently increased, and that was of great concern because many people felt in the constituency that this could be a direct link between incidents that had happened in France and in other European countries where people, particularly Jewish people, had been attacked, and they wanted to know if there was a link. And I was able to speak to the CST and to ask the Home Secretary on the floor of the House about this issue, and they were able to provide reassurances. So a lot of these issues are still continuing. David also mentioned an issue that I've been heavily involved in recently, and that is cladding on buildings. After the Grenfell fire, the government undertook a survey with local authorities to determine what properties had ACM cladding, aluminium cladding. Now, there was only one property in the Hendon constituency which caused concern, and that was Premier House. Now, many of you know Premier House, and it was converted from commercial to residential properties. And a lot of people who were owner-occupiers were concerned about the cladding. Now, that has mostly been resolved. But since that time, a lot of changes have taken place where particularly mortgage providers and lenders have said to either people seeking a mortgage or seeking to sell properties that they want to know what kind of cladding is on their building. And many people don't know, and that's causing huge problems. And in some cases, ensuring that the properties are considered worthless because they can't raise finance or they can't sell the properties. So I spent a lot of time upon this because maybe you imagine, maybe you don't, that the Hendon constituency has a huge number of people who are in these type of properties, many in Colindale, Mill Hill, some in Edgware, some down in Hendon as well. And it's causing a huge amount of problems for those people. And I, amongst others, are certainly pushing that issue in Parliament because it's very important. Another area that, again, seems to be below the radar in many ways is Iran. Now, maybe it's because we're going through a transitional period, and I'm sure some people might like to ask me about Donald Trump. But this is a time when, in many ways, the whole issue of Iran is up for grabs. We know that there has been discussions about further military action being taken against Iran. And reputedly, Mr. Trump was talked out of taking any such action. But we know that Mohsen Farizadeh was assassinated recently, and that has a direct impact not only upon Israel, who has certainly been rumored to be behind such an attack, but also America as well, as we currently have pretty much a vacuum as we have transitioned from one president to another. For those of you who don't know the individual, Farizadeh, he was actually the lead nuclear expert within Iran, who the government there in the United Kingdom and in America have been aware of for some time, and we've been aware of his activities. Over the summer, there was a couple of other parochial issues which became national headlines. The first was the free school meals. The government had put additional resources into free school meals, and I was one of those MPs when the original lockdown was introduced that asked the government to provide greater support, which they did. But a lot of that was drowned out during the campaign. It's a very emotive issue, and I think it's very easy to say you're starving kids. And I'm not convinced that was actually the reality. But I do think that the government lost the public relations exercise on that. And I do congratulate Marcus Radkovich for his campaign and what he's achieved. There's no doubt about he's done a great deal of good. The second issue that was a parochial issue, which became quite national, was the extension of the congestion charge. Now, this has come about because the Mayor of London has found that with the fall in revenues from the fares on the tube and particularly the buses, that he simply doesn't have the money to run the service. So he had to go to the government on 2 occasions to seek additional funds. Now, on the second occasion, it is indeed true. The government said there are things that you can and should do. I have very many concerns about the way that pensions are actually gold-plated within Transport for London, how the family and friends of Transport for London workers still receive free travel. But the Mayor wasn't prepared to look at those. And there was a discussion about the congestion charge. So the Mayor said, well, of course, the government are telling me that I must increase the congestion charge. Well, that wasn't actually true. But of course, it makes good politics. But a scheme was agreed and the bailout has been agreed. And that particular problem has been alleviated. I think it would be particularly bad if, I live in Hendon, that if the North Circular was then included in the congestion zone down to the South Circular, because not only would it mean that I would have to pay to go, not entirely to Brent Cross, but anywhere over the North Circular into Golders Green, but it would mean that the range of the congestion zone would be so large that everyone would just say, well, if I have to pay to go literally down the end of the A41, I may as well drive into London. And I think it would have actually reduced the effectiveness of the congestion zone. So there are just a couple of areas that we've had some issues over the summer, but they've been issues that have been very important to people and sometimes are magnified by the state of the lockdown that we're in. Now, I'll just conclude before I open up to questions by saying that I'm very pleased that the United Kingdom has come out of a national lockdown. There certainly are parts of the country that aren't happy with the tiers that they're in. It was a concern of mine and several other MPs, both Labour and Conservative, that London would actually be in tier 3. My feeling was that there are some parts of London, Tower Hamlets is one of those, that the R rate was very high, but not all of London. And I felt that it was not appropriate to put the whole 32 London boroughs into the same tier because some areas were at a particularly high level. Now, the government looked at that and subsequently agreed, and I'm very pleased that we are in tier 2. I know that many people remain concerned that there are still restrictions, particularly around religion and our ability to attend places of worship, and I certainly understand those. But we are not in the tiers that other parts of the countries face, and I think for that we should very much be thankful. So, David, that is a fairly brief, but I hope comprehensive roundup of the activities that I've been involved in. It certainly hasn't been a quiet time. In many ways, it's been a difficult time because MPs like doing things like going into debates, going into the the floor of the House of Commons and engaging in discussions, particularly topical. And it hasn't always been possible to do that. And even conducting meetings like this on Zoom is not the same as meeting people face to face. So a great deal of the passion has in some ways been extinguished. But the passion for what we do as members of Parliament has not. So I'd like to pass over to you, David, to see if there's any questions from anyone.
Thank you for that. Just a couple of points which you raised. You mentioned about the congestion charge in London, where the Mayor extended that to 7 days a week, ending at 10 p.m., which at the same time telling people not to travel on public transport and to use their cars. And then we had the Eat Out to Help Out in the West End, or sorry, to everywhere.
Yeah.
But it meant that people didn't go into London because nobody wanted to pay. So it had a negative impact on that. I just wonder, where the Mayor will stand on that later on, if he takes that, I don't know, as his legacy.
Well, I'm cautious. I'm aware that I'm speaking to you as a member of Parliament rather than a Conservative, shall we say. Though, of course, I am a Conservative. So it is for the Mayor to defend that. But you're entirely right. I think some of those issues have been self-defeating, including some of the traffic lanes for particularly bikes and other forms of transport, which have ensured that we've had people waiting in traffic while the lanes are pretty clear. And you're absolutely right that it was self-defeating that parts of the West End particularly were not able to benefit as much from the scheme that the Chancellor introduced. And I think it was self-defeating for the Mayor to do that. I won't focus too much upon the Mayor because it's for him to, as I say, to argue. But I think that was a wrong decision to be made.
Yeah. Last night, 55 members of the Conservative Party voted against the government plan on the stricter coronavirus tier system, with a further 16 abstaining. Why? Could you explain to everybody why there was such a rebellion?
Well, first of all, there are some members of Parliament I think have genuine grievance. Those in Kent are quite concerned. So there's one part of Kent that the coronavirus is particularly bad. But there are other parts of Kent where it's almost non-existent, if not non-existent. I heard Sir Bob Neal raise that issue, that he is not able to go and see friends in parts of Kent from his constituency in Bromley because they're subject to Tier 3, and he is a London MP, he is subject to Tier 2. So they are perplexed that they've been included when it is one part of the county of Kent. I think many people are looking forward to the review on the 16th of December, where between now and then they can make their case to make those arguments that they should have reduced tiers. Now, one of the issues has been about whether it should have been at a more localised level. It is harder, but still possible to ensure that if there is a particular hotspot, that area is subject to different tiers than other parts of the county. And as I say, that can be achieved by a district level. There were some members, I think, who had genuine grievances in parts of Manchester. Sir Graham Brady, for example, I think there were some issues there. Some members simply did not want to be in Tier 3. And they have been subject to restrictions for a long time. It is very difficult. They have concerns not only about the economy, but also concerns about mental health and access to healthcare for people with non-COVID related conditions. And they often feel that the cure is worse than the condition. And I do have some sympathy in that area. For me, I voted for it because we were in Tier 2. I would have been very unhappy if we were in Tier 3, but I made my representations early, as did others in London, and we managed to avoid that. But thirdly, I think there was also some individuals who do have an axe to grind. Some are former ministers and some simply don't like Boris. And I think there is some of that creeping in, and they need to be very careful to ensure that some of their personal relationships don't cloud over their judgment into what is the best for their constituents.
Thank you. By just leading on from that, the virus or Christmas, should there not be any gatherings to stem the virus, or gather over Christmas with a further spread of the virus? What is behind the decision to open up for 5 days, bearing in mind that the virus doesn't know it's Christmas? And how will we pay for this? Will it be a case of further lockdown? It's been mooted that there would be 5 days lockdown for each day that we open up over Christmas, which would give us another 25 days of lockdown in January.
Okay. Well, first of all, those members of Parliament who voted against last night or abstained, a lot of those people feel that our liberties are being so overwhelmed by the restrictions of the coronavirus pandemic that they should not be introduced. They also say that people are sensible enough to take the right actions to ensure that the pandemic doesn't spread. Now, that's for other people to decide whether that's correct or not. But by opening up, it does give that theory an opportunity to express itself. I hope that people take the opportunity to meet up but to do it in a way that ensures that they and others remain safe. And they can do that through social distancing and by wearing masks and whatever. The reason that I believe the government has suggested it, because it hasn't been confirmed yet, is I think that far in advance, and still we are talking, what are we, the second today? It's still over 3 weeks away, that a lot changes in that time. And if we were in a situation where the government felt we were a month ago, then that would not have been possible. So I think in some ways it's providing the hope to people that they will be able to come together. And certainly not closing any doors. But how do we pay for it in the long term? Well, I hope by that time that the R rate has reduced even further, that we have even fewer cases of infection, and that we're not in the situation where we are now and where we have been. Secondly, will we have to pay for it? It's quite possible, but we can't predict 3 weeks down the line where we're going to be then. So I hope that we're in a better position by then. We may have a slight increase, but my experience is that period of time from pretty much Christmas Day itself to almost the 2nd of January is a very quiet period. So I hope people won't be going to work, children, excuse me, won't be going to school, and there won't be the kind of mass gatherings that we have when the normal weeks of work continues. So I hope it's a quiet period after Christmas, and we see that the risk of spread during that time is diminished by the natural actions that people don't tend to congregate as much as they do, as I say, during a normal working week time.
Before I just pass on to bring in other people, I just want to, you mentioned obviously that people have, the feeling was of some of the MPs who voted against the bill last night, regarded that many people out there have common sense. Of course, there are people out there who, whether they believe they're above the law or not, and we have Dominic Cummings and Margaret Ferrier, Stephen Kinnock, Kyle Walker, Catherine Caldwood, Robert Jenrick, to name but a few, and then Victoria Derbyshire, who this week was quoted in saying she would break the rule of 6 for Christmas to be with her family of 7, and she justified her public comment by stating that everybody else would be doing it. Now, these are people in the public eye who don't have the common sense. Not to say that people not in the public eye don't have common sense, but you know, unfortunately, sometimes people don't have that sense and need to be led. And I know there's been issues where somebody commented that a pub would be opened, and a person said, "I don't want to go to the pub," and it was a case of, well, don't go to the pub. But he heard it was open and thought you should go. So it's just wondering on those levels. And before you answer that, in terms of the vaccine that there will be, that we're talking about, and obviously there were 4 companies who actually came up with the vaccine at the same time, interestingly just a week after the American election. Now, those conspiracy theorists out there would say something's very fishy, but I'm sure there are reasons behind that. But only 43% of people say in this country have said they will have the vaccine, countering the anti-vaxxers. And but then you've also got the flu jabs for over 50s. And do the vaccines prove that all ills can be redressed with enough money? And how much is being pumped into this? And what confidence will people have in the vaccine? And where do we go from here?
Right, I try and recall all those. The first one, people over the whole period who've behaved inappropriately. We heard a lot about Dominic Cummings, and I certainly wasn't content with that. I wasn't convinced he was going to resign or be moved on, and sure enough, he didn't. I'm not here to defend him, but I understand that he wanted to go because both him and his wife had the condition and they needed someone to look after their child. But I'm not here to defend them. But saying I went to Bamburgh Castle to check my eyesight is just bizarre in the extreme. I think that if you have any concerns about your health, you should consider others. I wear a mask, and I sometimes think, well, does it really help? But it doesn't matter whether it helps me. It helps other people. particularly those in shops who are coming into contact with so many different people. And I always feel I will do what they want me to do. And in the summer, I went into a cafe somewhere and I saw people sitting inside eating. So I went in without a mask, and this lady said to me, "Can you put a mask on?" So I did. And I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't realize." And she said, "Thank you for being, what did she say? Taking it in good grace." And I said, I'm happy to do whatever you want, because they come into contact with so many people, it's for them to decide how they want to be treated rather than me saying how I want to treat them. So I think those people who've set a bad example, and as you say, quite rightly, it's all different political parties and so-called celebrities. And I think they're wrong to do that. And they should set a better example, because it's not about them. It's about other people, particularly those who may have underlying health conditions. The whole issue of COVID is quite a sensitive one for my office at the moment. Without going into too many details, we have been touched in my office by a death by coronavirus. And so we certainly have strong views on that now. You mentioned about the vaccine. And you mentioned that 4 companies came together a week after Mr. Trump. Well, has he lost yet? I'm not sure. Well, he hasn't conceded. He hasn't conceded. Okay, let me get that right. It was fantastically stated by one of my colleagues, William Ragg, on the floor of the House yesterday. He said he would have no truck with conspiracy theorists. He said that he doesn't know any government in the Western world that is competent enough to run a conspiracy without cocking it up. And he's absolutely right. I think it's such a big issue that you would not be able to contain that secret for that long. And so I think it is perhaps not serendipity that the 4 of them came together at the same time, but I think they probably would have been working along similar pathways. And they've come to pretty much a similar conclusion, though, of course, some are different than others in the way that they are stored. But you mentioned about having the vaccination. Well, I did see another survey today, and it said that 67% of people said they would be prepared to have it, 27% said they wouldn't, and 23% said they wouldn't, and 10% said they weren't sure. It's hard, isn't it? Again, this is why I think common sense comes into it, because I've thought long and hard, and I've felt that I'm very keen to have a vaccine because I'd like my parents to have it as soon as possible. So I think that tells me what my gut instinct is. I never take the flu vaccine. I tell my GP I'm not old enough, and he just laughs and says it's about time you have it. But I don't not have it because I think there's a problem with it. I just don't have it because I like to think that I'm still young and invincible. But in terms of the vaccine, I think as someone who comes into contact with a lot of people, once again, I think it's incumbent upon me to have it because I'm trying to put other people at a lesser risk than if I didn't have it. So it's not always about me, it's about other people.
Thank you. I'll pass on. I was, by the way, the comment about the 4 companies and conspiracy theory, I said somewhat tongue-in-cheek. So.
That's fine. That's fine.
Changing the subject, somebody is asking the question here: why is it necessary for the UK government to provide aid to the Palestinian Authority when there are many wealthy Arab countries who could provide this type of aid? Well, that's always been the case, but
well, simply for the same reason that. They're so-called Palestinian refugees. That these countries, these Arab countries, don't want to take them. You know, if Gaza is such an open prison, why is the prison wall that faces into Egypt? Why is it not opened up and Egyptians accommodate these people? It's simply because they don't want to. They realize there's a lot of problems that come with them, particularly Hamas, and so they simply don't want to be involved with them, and that's why. And they're not prepared to fund them. We fund through UNRWA. And many of us have specific concerns about incitement through education, the naming of buildings and schools and public buildings after so-called martyrs of terrorism. And I have a great deal of concern. And it's an area that, as my membership of the Conservative Friends of Israel, we are constantly badgering the government and asking questions about this. But it remains a great concern about salaries that are paid to terrorists and the rest of it, and it's certainly something that we continually pursue with the Foreign Office.
Obviously, you mentioned refugees. It's interesting that generally throughout the world and throughout time, refugee status was always regarded as one generation.
Yeah.
But the Palestinians are now in their third generation,
yeah,
moving towards fourth generation. How long does refugee status continue? Or
well, I agree with you. One generation. I think this is crazy where people are saying 4 generations time. Well, I'm still a refugee. It should have been stopped a long time ago. And this is one thing that I hope that President Trump would actually be successful in. He was very keen to pursue the peace deal, and certainly by recognizing Jerusalem as the capital. And so I think he was taking so-called bold steps, which I believe that other countries should take. I have to say, I'm out of step with the British government, the Conservative government on this. They don't recognize Jerusalem as the capital. They have other issues which I disagree with. So I'm not in step with them either. So again, this isn't a party political issue, but there are areas which I hoped would be addressed, but simply haven't. Some time ago, a former ambassador to Israel, I spoke to him about the peace process, and he said that when David Cameron was Prime Minister and Barack Obama was President, David Cameron asked him this question: what are we going to do? And Barack Obama said, nothing. I'm not going to expend any political capital because it's not going to happen. So you could see from that point, he wasn't even prepared to engage. And President Trump has done that. Unfortunately, we haven't had the success which I hoped. I think there has been some travel, but we haven't actually achieved it yet. And to address the issue of salaries, terrorism, martyrdom, and particularly refugee status would have been the next logical process.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Martin Brown. If you'd like to unmute yourself and so you can ask a question.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
It's Catherine Brown.
Catherine.
Yes.
It was one of you.
Yeah.
Hi, Matthew. I hope.
Hello.
Hope you remember us.
I do.
Yes. You spoke about the issue of cladding to buildings, and I absolutely understand and agree with the principle of it. But because a member of our family is directly involved with this problem, I'd like to put to you 2 scenarios which I think make so far the process untenable.
Okay.
The first is there are only a few companies where they have surveyors who are capable of undertaking the work, and they're hugely swamped. And who knows when they're ever going to get round to any particular block. And the second thing is, at least in our personal case that we know about, because of that, there was a formula that was agreed between solicitors whereby managing agents would, on behalf of the freeholder, would provide a certain worded letter which would allow the sale to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And that's agreed, no problem with it at all, except the managing agent is not prepared to give any priority to any impending sale, even if it won't fall through, and even if the purchaser finds themselves homeless because they have to be out of their, say, rented accommodation by a certain date and ends up in a hotel or whatever the case may be. So they're completely intransigent. I wonder what your view is on this, because I thought that if you're going to have a process that is going to be helpful, it would be to take everything into account and not put stumbling blocks in front of people where they're sitting, as you rightly say, in blocks, owning properties which are valueless until this is sorted out. Does a managing agent have the legal right to drag their feet, and this is months we're talking about, whereby the wording's actually been given to them. So all they have to do is put it on their headed paper, and they say, well, it's in the pile of work to be done in due course.
Okay, first of all, you say about building surveyors. You're right. There's about 300 across the country, which is not enough. Oh, I'm good. I'm pleased to see Hillary there. I've just seen her popped up there. Hilary works with me, and I wanted her on the call because when issues are raised, it's useful if she takes notes while I speak to people. You're absolutely right. There's about 300 individuals who are responsible or knowledgeable upon the issues of cladding. And a lot of them are very concerned that they will not certify a building as being safe. And the reason for that is they're concerned about being sued. And so one of the areas that I've been pressing the government on is about indemnity insurance for them. That there needs to be, in some ways, an indemnity insurance, just like the flood scheme, because it was so risky. A lot of insurance companies wouldn't insure residential and commercial properties for flood. So the government had to step in and be the lender of last resort, that they would pick up particular bills. So I'm pushing the government on that first issue. Secondly is the number of surveyors, as you say. The government don't employ these people. So we're encouraging the industry and the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors to try and get more people involved in that part of the process. So this has taken a long time, and it will do for obvious reasons. But the second point you mentioned about the managing agents, I used to I'd had my flat in Hendon. I don't live in it now. I live in a house in Hendon. And I would never want to go back to living in a flat because of the managing agents. It's not even that mine were particularly difficult, but they did things that I didn't want them to do. And there's nothing you can do to stop them. And I had one guy in my block, Les, who was great. He didn't work. So he would go through the service charge line by line, and then he would call them over and they would come and meet him on site, and he would talk to them about what they were doing and why. Now, he had the time to do that, but I didn't because I worked. And so I never wanted to be beholden to a managing agent again, because the example that you described, you can't force them to do anything or get on with something like that. But one of the issues is that this whole necessity to have a certificate, it's become known as EWS1 form, that previously buildings didn't need it. But the government changed some housing advice, and the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors recommended that people should then have this form. And that's what's held up the process. Now, I asked the minister on the floor of the House recently about this and whether he'd come to an agreement with UK Finance, who are the umbrella body for all the mortgage companies. And he gave a rather disjointed response, actually. He said that we'd come to some agreement. But today, only today, I asked the same question as a written answer, but it went in just before I asked it on the floor of the House. And he says that the EWS1 form is something that they've made changes to agreements with the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, not with UK Finance. And that's where we need to get the change. So I'm drafting a letter to UK Finance to see where they stand, whether they would take an acceptance that particularly smaller properties don't need this EWS1 form, which is being held up by the managing agents and through the lack of surveyors. So sorry if that's a long answer, but it is, as you say, a complicated area. What we need to do to change managing agents is we need leasehold reform. The government have committed to this. There's been 3 Law Commission reports. We know what we need to do. We just need to get on and do it. And so far, that hasn't happened. Again, I've been pressing the government on that. I've asked several questions, and we need to make it fairer towards tenants. Effectively, people who are leaseholders are tenants in their own property. They pay a ground rent and they pay a service charge. We need to make it more that they are able to effect change within the place that they live. And so for that, we need change to leasehold. I can't hear you, Catherine. I can't hear you. I need you to unmute yourself. Hey, we can hear you now.
Can you hear
yes,
me now?
Please.
Yes,
Yeah.
People are losing their jobs, and there must be a certain proportion of those people who do live in flats. They're no longer able to pay their mortgage, and if they're lucky enough, they would find somebody to buy the flat. And if they can't facilitate that, they could just...
Well, they won't be able to find someone to buy the flat, because to sell it, the mortgage company would say, we need an EWS1 form.
That's right.
And
so they could end up in default and have to come in and take them. It is just so unfair. And I think that it might need some emergency legislation.
Yep, agreed. As I say, there are several of us. Hilary Benn, he's pushing it hard from his constituency, and as a Labour Member of Parliament. We had a debate back in 2018, I think it was, and it was very well attended. And there's a lot of MPs, you can imagine, particularly in London, who are concerned about this. So I completely understand the situation. I had a meeting on Zoom with the Hendon Cladding Collective recently, and representatives from different blocks all around the constituency came and set out the issues that they had. And this is one reason why I'm certainly pushing this constituency problem. But there are several thousand people in the Hendon constituency, and if you have an opportunity, it's worth having a look at my website. And there is a petition there, which I'm hoping to present to Parliament soon. And I'd like to get it over 1,000 people, because I've said in Parliament that I have several thousand constituents who this is affecting. So if you could add your name to that, then certainly that lends weight to when I present a petition in Parliament. So if you could, I'd be very grateful. And that goes for everyone, actually. David. Back to David.
Sorry, I'm muted as well. David Oliver, are you there?
Yes. Just about, yeah. Hi, Matthew again.
Hello.
We've lived through the most difficult of our times, of our lives, and I don't think any of us, could have imagined what was about to happen for the year in front of us. We've at least now, all of a sudden, we can see a tiny little light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
And we hope some sort of normality will hopefully will be in early spring, early summer. How do you see life then, when we're supposedly to get back to normal?
That's an interesting question, and you're absolutely right. The last year or two, last year in Parliament was very peculiar. The government didn't have a majority, and we were going through all the Brexit discussions, and nothing happened, and it came to a stalemate. And I thought, this couldn't get any worse. And then now this year, the coronavirus, it's just unimaginable. Certainly those of us, and I think that's all of us here, have never experienced anything like this. Even in the Second World War, and there's very few people who will remember that immediately, it was never like this. We're subject to restrictions and that fear of not being able to go out, or certainly to interact with people. But in regards to what happens in the future, you're right. I think there is a glimmer of hope with the vaccine. I hope it's successful when it's rolled out, which it will be as early as next week. But I think there will be a lot of changes to the way people live and work and shop as well. That's the other thing. One great victim of this pandemic has been the high street. Now, there were problems with it already, but certainly it's been exacerbated by the pandemic. So Debenhams has gone today. We see Arcadia Group pretty much gone. And a lot of other Oasis, Cath Kids and all these kind of shops, they're all on their way out. And we have seen a demand in online shopping. Someone who's a political friend of mine, he works head of public affairs at Royal Mail, and there was some issue with deliveries around the Mill Hill area. So I went to him on Facebook and said, look, there's a problem. Can you just tell me what's going on so I can tell my constituents? And he said that they had levels of demand that they would have at Christmas time in terms of the amount of parcels and deliveries that they had. And they just didn't have the people that they would ordinarily have at that time of year. And so that gives you an idea of how busy the delivery services have been. So I think we see a lot of changes in respect to the high street. I think we see a lot of changes into the way people work. First of all, some people travel a lot with business, obviously flying abroad. And that won't always be necessary now. And I think probably their companies would say, well, what's the point of you taking a flight to wherever, staying there for one night and coming back? That will cost us however X many hundreds or even thousands of pounds when you can do it by Zoom. And I think in some ways that's quite useful. I've attended conferences on Zoom, and I'm going to do so again. And as I mentioned in my select committee, we're doing that by Zoom. We have witnesses who don't need to come into Parliament. And so it does mean that we can work faster, that we don't have to spend time traveling, and we can engage in conversations and discussions without actually traveling and being there together. But the other issue is that if people can work in pretty much any location, then I think we see people moving out of city centres. You could even see people moving out of London. And perhaps if they need to go to work to an office or to wherever they work once or twice a week, they'll be prepared to travel further because they won't have to do the journey so often. So I think there will be a lot of areas where people will make significant life choices about how they spend their money, about where they spend their money, and where they live and indeed work as well. And that does have an impact upon how or where they educate their children. But there's a lot of, I think there could be in many ways almost a dislocation of many of the communities that we have in the Hendon constituency, as people decide that they simply don't need to do things the way they did before. But one area I think that will be maintained is the hospitality sector. I think people are still keen on going out to eat. People are still keen to be entertained, going to the theatre, to the cinema, activities like that. And people are very concerned that they're not able to do so. So I think that will continue, that will come back. But I am worried about the retail sector and the way people work.
Somebody is asking a question. David Pelter is asking, am I wrong in thinking that only those with friends in high places get lucrative PPE and related contracts?
Well, there certainly has been that accusation, and there may be some foundation to it. But I was approached by some constituents who said they were able to help. So I fed those names through to the government. Some were successful and some weren't. There's always going to be an element of who you know. But what I would say is that the government were criticised in the very beginning for not having enough PPE. And then literally all the contact tendering rules went out of the window as part of the coronavirus legislation. There was an exemption for that. And then they're being criticised for too much. So it is one of those areas that you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. I think some of those people were actually helpful in providing equipment to the government, and perhaps there were some individuals who were not. I hope in time that we have a public inquiry and we actually get to the bottom of what worked well and what didn't work. But I do think that on the whole, if someone was able to offer assistance, then that has been a good thing. But very early on, I had a concern. There was, I'm trying to be careful. There was a chemist in Edgware that it had been brought to my attention that the price of sanitizer had gone up a great deal. And I wrote to them, and they came back and explained why the price has gone up. But when products are in demand, price goes up. That's always been the way. So in some ways, I understand where the gentleman was coming from. But as I said, it was a situation where the government can never win with that. If they don't have enough, they're criticised. If they have something supplied by, I don't know, an acquaintance, a friend, or someone has a contact, they're damned as well. But as I say, with an inquiry, I hope that more of this comes out.
I have no doubt that whichever way the government went, whatever their decisions were, they're damned if they do and damned if they don't. Yeah. It's an unfortunate situation that we're in, and you know, we will live through it, and we'll come out the other end and we'll see what there is. I don't know if we'll ever get back to a normality, but it would certainly be a new reality. Somebody else is asking, Barbara Sherling is asking, how long do you believe it will take to pay back the loans which have been made for furlough payments and grants?
I saw that question. I thought, Barbara, I thought Andrew and Barbara were friends of mine, but clearly not. No, in all seriousness, it's hard to say. I've seen various projections. What I would say is that the government raising money through gilts and bonds, it means that they can actually borrow money and on the international market as well. And they're paying back a level of interest that 12 years ago during the crash, they were paying higher amounts of interest then. So while they still have to pay the money back, which I accept, it's actually at a lower rate than it was 12 years ago. Now, that doesn't provide a huge amount of comfort, but it does mean that we're in a better position to pay it back as we do. But when are we going to do that? Well, it's going to be a good 5 to 10 years at least, if not even more. It could be a significant amount of time. It depends on lots of things. People say about, well, is the economic outlook looking good? Well, the answer is it's kind of a fudged answer, because it's going to become better because we've had such a huge drop in a small amount of time. We've lost 10% of GDP within 9 months. This is unheard of, but that is coming back. You see confidence not only in the stock exchange, but also through industries like the banking sector, where some banks had offset amounts of money to provide for bad debt. And we've seen, particularly with someone like Lloyd's, who are a domestic bank, only invest in the UK, that their bad debt provision wasn't as bad as they were expecting. So companies are paying back monies. They are able to do so through bouncing the economy and through the assistance provided by the government. And some people are still spending. But the converse side of that is, as we go on in the next few months, we will see unemployment creeping up, because we've seen redundancies announced in the retail sector, and we'll see that in the hospitality sector and other areas. So we do have more pain to come, but I hope and I believe the government's right to invest in the areas that is going to allow people to reskill and retrain and to undertake other economic activities.
There's a question from Stephen Truman, which I'll ask, and I'm going to add something of my own onto the end of that, which ties in. His question is, how about a windfall tax for those who've made handsome profits out of the pandemic, like Amazon, that might help the country's deficit? But in America, on lottery winnings, they pay tax. I believe it's around 30%. If somebody in this country, instead of why we don't tax lottery winnings, if somebody's won £1 million and they paid out 30%, they're still taking home 700,000. They've won. Would it really make any difference to the people who are paying tax out of their lottery winnings? Why do we not tax lottery winnings?
To answer that question, I don't know, but I will find out. That's a good question. I will ask Treasury why we don't do so. I don't know is the answer, but I will find out and I'll come back to you.
So anyway, but sorry, that was my side of it. But
no, that's
about a windfall tax.
The windfall tax. It's hard to say actually who has done well out of the pandemic. Now, I'm sure there are some people. Some people might have bought shares and they've been particularly low in the last couple of months. Tesco today announced that they were paying back several £1 million. I think it's 580 odd £1 million that the government provided for them. But because they were continuing to trade, they said they didn't need it. And I thought that was admirable, and actually shows that there are some people some organizations that are prepared to publicly say this is the right thing to do and to do it. I think there were many companies actually didn't pay a dividend. And while that is important to particularly those who have pensions, I think it was financially responsible of companies to do that. And the majority of companies did that. It's because one of my colleagues, the Green Member of Parliament, said that Shell and others were paying dividends hand over fist. So again, I asked the questions, and that is not correct. They have not been. So not every company has made a huge amount of money. I think it'd be interesting to see in which areas that people have made money. And again, that would be an area for the Chancellor to consider. He set out some of his thinking. We look forward to how more detail will start to emerge in the next several months or so. But a windfall tax, it would depend where. and on what, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, with some of the companies that have done very well are the tech companies. I know Ocado are massive now, absolutely massive, and in America, obviously.
But they would argue as well that
Netflix have done particularly well as well.
But they would argue, I presume, that to say that the pandemic, if anything, they contributed to the success of the country in coming through it by providing their services at the crucial time. So yeah. I'm not someone who instantly looks to tax something. No. But it's an interesting area, and I'll certainly give it further consideration. Yes, yeah.
Okay. David Oliver wants to come back in. He's got another question. If you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi. Yeah. Edgware Central has become disgusting. The shops are revolting. The whole area around there, right the way up to the station and back down to the bottom of our end, and it's just horrible. I mean, it seems to be getting worse and worse. Some time ago, there were muting of a big development at but we're by the station, wasn't it? And
the Broadwalk.
And the Broadwalk and all of that.
Yeah.
And obviously, if that is done the way that I saw the plans, it would be terrific. But is it ever likely to happen?
Well, only in the last few days, the leader of the council said to me that he had some documents relating to that. And did I want to have an official presentation, or should he send them over to me? So I am due to have a look at them in the next few days. But my understanding is it's continuing to go ahead. Excuse me. And the proposals remain as they are. I understand that there's someone who's local who has some input into the scheme. And so it looks at it though it is going to go forward. But in regards to the station road itself, for some time there has been many complaints. A lot of revolved around things like street drinking, and the police and the council have worked to address that, introducing CCTV, and put in some of the facilities in planters, for example, new trees were an effort to try and improve the street scene. But yeah, the council have also introduced greater litter picks because of the amount of litter that is about. And it does seem on occasion that, yeah, it could be better. It could be better. I think that the proposed, I don't want to call it regeneration, the proposed development at the other end may be that impetus to give the whole of Station Road a particular boost, and I hope that happens. Yeah.
Should Stephen Gallant have been pardoned, though he is thwarted an attack by terrorist Usman Khan on London Bridge? He is a convicted murderer.
This is really interesting, because while I believe that people should be punished for crimes, and certainly victims should be at the forefront of our justice system, he as an individual is in many ways a success story. That yes, he was convicted for murder. I think it was a very murky, he killed someone who was accused of trying to kill someone else, and the woman was assaulted, and it was all very unpleasant. But what I would say is that he, certainly after the attack at Fishmongers Hall, it wasn't just that he put himself in personal danger, where he was aware that there was a suicide belt there, but he continued to confront the attacker calm. But it's subsequent, his public utterances since that he has again publicly apologized for the murder that he committed. And I always feel that people should be punished, but in some ways not in some ways, that they should be punished, but also have some rehabilitation as part of their sentence in many ways. And I've always felt that people who were imprisoned should not only serve a minimum amount of time, which they do, but they should also be subject to other conditions. For example, they should achieve basic literacy and numeracy, because people who can't read and write are more likely to go on to reoffend. And the rate of recidivism amongst these people is very high. Now, he's one of those that went to prison that couldn't read or write. And he said that they take everything away from you in prison, but he realized the only thing that he could pull back was his education. And so he did learn to read, he did learn to write, and he also took a business degree. And in many ways, he's turned his life around. So should he be pardoned? I'm not convinced. And pardon doesn't mean that he's not still a convicted criminal. It just means that he's had a certain amount of time taken off his sentence. I think the conviction stands because he's did it and he's been convicted of it in a court of law. But I think he is someone, particularly where he was on that day and what he was doing, demonstrates that rehabilitation can occur. And I think it has worked with him. Yes, I do. So the whole issue of pardoning doesn't bother me as much as the way I think he's turned his life around, and that's been a positive. Yes, but I would never condone what he did. Absolutely not. The original offence.
I expect we couldn't have an evening where I couldn't ask you this question. Jeremy Corbyn, suspension and reinstatement, and where Sir Keir Starmer has stood on this. What are your views on the matter?
I'm cautious of discussing another political party, but because it's so personal to so many constituents, I'd always resisted saying Corbyn was anti-Semitic. Always. But his behaviour, both after the EHRC report and subsequently, there's just a blind spot. He can't help himself. He cannot. Him, Ken Livingstone, George Galloway, they can't help themselves. And they feel so morally superior. They just can't believe that anyone could accuse them of anything as heinous as anti-Semitism or racism. The fact that he has been suspended was certainly the right decision. There's no doubt about that. My understanding is that Keir Starmer thought probably he would just be suspended. By the time of the next election, he wouldn't be a member of the parliamentary Labour Party, and he wouldn't be a member of the Labour Party itself. So he just wouldn't be able to stand as their candidate. So effectively, he just ruled himself out. But I think the behaviour of some constituency Labour Party, including the Hendon one, I would have thought that of two in the country, Finching Golders Green and the Hendon constituency Labour Party, would have just said nothing about this if they felt the way that they clearly do. On Friday, they had a meeting where they demanded that he be reinstated. Now, I know Tulip Siddiqui, who's the Member of Parliament in Hampstead and Kilburn, her party had the same discussion, and she said it was a most threatening atmosphere. And so while Jeremy Corbyn may not be a member of the Parliamentary Labour Party, I think his influence is continuing, and the Labour Party really need to address this. Now, the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Angela, I can't remember, Rayner, I couldn't remember her name. She said that they could be expelling or suspending thousands of people. It's horrific, but they've got to do something. They've got to do it. But Corbyn, I just think he's a lost cause. He just can't help himself. He cannot. There's no doubt about the behaviour of people in his office and the way they attacked people who spoke out against anti-Semitism, who were working for the Labour Party. It's reprehensible.
Yeah. Before I come to the next question, just to say that if Hillary wants to, if she missed half an hour or whatever she missed, it's on YouTube and she can always catch up from there later. I'm not sure when it will be available anyway on YouTube, so she could always catch up on there. There's a question following on from your comments regarding online meetings. Does the country still need HS2?
Oh, crikey. Does it still need HS2? But I discussed this with Grant Shapps. Gosh, it's got to be a year ago now, hasn't it? And this is when the time he announced he was having a review. And so many millions had been spent. And he said, I'll have this review. And even if it means that we effectively lose that amount of money, I will stop it if I think necessary. The answer, do we still need it? I would say, on balance, yes, we do. We do still need it. We've started that process. We will continue for the simple reason that while there may be some changes to the way people work, we already mentioned about there's some aspects of life that will continue, that people will still want to be to get involved in hospitality and entertainment, and HS2 can certainly be part of that. And I also mentioned as well that while some people may choose to live further from where they currently do and be employed in a different part of the country, using HS2 may be an opportunity for them to travel fewer times during the week, but when they do need to travel, and it could be distances from Manchester to London, they'll actually be able to achieve that. And I think HS2 will have a great impact as well upon aviation, people's access to both regional airports and indeed the London airports. So I think that we should continue with HS2, and we should have an opportunity for people to travel when they want at a speed that is as quick as possible.
I'm sorry, I'm just looking at, I'll just reword a question that's being asked. It's basically, how will the councils make up the deficit that is obviously brought about by the fact that so few people, or the business rates are going to be substantially lower within those boroughs' councils? How will they make that up? Are they going to put up council charges to the individuals and householders?
Well, first of all, business rates are set by the government, and they're collected by local authorities who send it back to the Treasury, who then redistribute it. And so any changes of that will be decided by government nationally. There is likely to be a reduction in business rates, but that will be an issue for the Treasury to concern themselves with. In regards to local authorities, Barnet's gone through a very difficult period since 2002, almost 20 years now. When I was first elected, immediately there were issues about reallocation of the revenue support grant and how much local authorities in the south were getting, how much they were receiving. And Barnet has been very adept in not only making the efficiencies, but also spending in the right areas. So areas around children's services are very important, and adult social care and have been ring-fenced. Education is the money that goes to local authorities for education goes straight to the school, so the councils can't take any money from that. It has to go straight to the school. But I think that the whole issue of adult social care is the important one, and it's the one where the government do need to come up with a funding formula that's not only works but also is affordable. Now, again, this is something that I've been pushing the Department of Health on for some time. They haven't done that, and we need to do this. This has been a long-standing problem, and the affordability of such a service has to be a priority both for the Treasury and indeed for councils themselves. What they do in regard to the charging of services, let's take, for example, car parking charging. I know from personal experience that if you increase charges too high, you will find that you'll bring in less revenue because people won't simply park there. They'll find alternatives, and the high street will suffer as people go and park for free in Brent Cross. And so you do have to bear this in mind in what you set as charges. But certainly the government have found that when you reduce taxes like corporation tax, the amount of revenue actually goes up because it becomes more attractive to work and invest in this country. And the same can be held true in our local high streets as well.
Somebody's asking a question. Are there plans to change the conditions or cancel the Freedom Pass?
No. It's a simple answer. No.
That's good. That's nice and quick. Why has Crossrail been such a project delay failure and underestimated in terms of cost?
Well, once again, this is an issue for the mayor. It's under the mayor's responsibility, and some changes that had been made around the financing has ensured that the government had to put more money into it. And so this issue is one for him as one of the projects that he's responsible for. So it's not directly a government matter.
I can't fail to mention America. How much do you feel that the COVID influence had on the US election? And as a result of President Trump's actions, are we losing faith in democracy? And should he merely accept defeat and move on gracefully, or should he continue to fight? And how will Britain be with the Americans if Joe Biden is the president? Which is right.
Okay, first of all, did COVID have an effect? I'm sure some people did vote on that basis. Yes, of course they did. But we saw with both Joe Biden and Donald Trump that the number of people voting for both of them went up. The number of people voting went up. But I actually believe that could be for lots of reasons, not just COVID. COVID could be one of them, but it could be the people decided they didn't like the way Donald Trump was running government or presidency by Twitter. I have some concerns about that as well. There are other aspects that people were happy with him, the way he was seeking to assist the Rust Belt, but then he was refusing to engage in the World Health Organization. So I think there's a lot of different reasons why people did vote or perhaps didn't vote previously. But COVID is a possibility. They clearly had different ideas between the two of them, but I think that was more on a personal issue. You mentioned about whether people are losing faith in democracy. I think people have lost faith in democracy for several years now, good 30 odd years. People aren't aligned to political parties as they used to be in the past. People would describe themselves as lifelong Labour supporters, lifelong Conservative supporters. And nowadays, people don't tend to identify in the same way. And I think in wider society, as we've seen people having less respect for authority, be it through organised religion or be it through respect for education establishments or even the police, attitudes have changed. So I think there's been a realignment of people's views upon various organisations and the state that we used to accept completely. Now we tend not to. And you mentioned another point, our relationship. Well, some time ago, I spoke to a colleague of mine. I don't think he'd mind me saying this. I spoke to James Cleverly, who's a Foreign Office minister, about something completely different. And I said to him at the end of our conversation, because he telephoned me, I said, what's going to happen in America? And he said, oh, that's an interesting one. He said, because some months ago, we thought Trump was a shoo-in. He said, but now the view of the Foreign Office is that it's not certain. So their view changed in the fact that they not only treated Mr. Biden more open-handedly than perhaps they had previously treated the Democrats, and there was a different view. Now, subsequently, that has changed. That Joe Biden is going to become the next president of the United States. Now, how that happens, we don't know. Maybe the National Guard will remove Mr. Trump. I don't know. Maybe he will simply go but never concede, which is acceptable. Yeah, I think to do that, he's acknowledged he's lost, but he just doesn't want to admit it. I think going down the route of any legal action is always ill-advised. I remember in 1997 in the seat in Winchester in Hampshire, where the Conservative member of Parliament lost by one vote. And so he sought an election petition. He took legal action, and the High Court overturned the result because of alleged irregularities. And the subsequent by-election happened, and Mark Oaten, the Liberal Democrat candidate, won by about a majority of 18,000, I recall. People don't like bad losers. You just have to accept it, even if you feel that you were hard done by. I'm sure that everyone feels hard done by if any election doesn't go the way they want it. And so you have to suck it up. Was it the mayor of Cleveland or someone said he had to put his big boy pants on and just suck it up. And I think that's what you have to do. David, we can't hear you.
I know, I'm muted. Sorry. So Peter Hartman's asking the question, what is your opinion of depriving the over 75s of the free television license?
Well, it was back when George Osborne was Chancellor that he came to an agreement with the BBC that they would take over the responsibility for that, and they jumped at the chance. And I think it's disreputable now that they've decided that they want over 75s to pay for a television license. Now, someone who was at the BBC for a decade, when I went to work in the strategy department, I remember asking myself a question, which was, and don't forget, this is 13, 14 years ago. And I asked the question of myself was, is the license fee sustainable in the digital age? And I came to the conclusion that it's not. And since that time, we have products such as Netflix, where people are very happy to pay a monthly fee and to watch the television that they want. And I think that is the way the funding of the broadcast industry will be going forward. Now, the BBC have decided not to go down that route, and they want to stick with the license fee, and which I think is not the way for them. If they have a huge back catalogue, 40 Towers, The Two Ronnies, all this stuff that people want to watch and will pay to watch it. But they decided to introduce the iPlayer, which they didn't charge for. Now, the iPlayer only works in the UK, but they could have put it on a streaming service just like Netflix, and they could have charged people in America who love British comedies, soap operas and Doctor Who and everything else. They could have charged for that and made money, but they just didn't want to go down that route. They always say that, well, we need the money because we've got to pay the same salaries as the commercial sector. But that's simply not true, because the commercial sector, and we've seen this particularly in the pandemic, do not have a guaranteed income. Their sources of revenue, particularly revenue from advertising, has plummeted. So the amount that they can invest in content production is not the same amount as the BBC. And I think the way that BBC has expanded over the years, particularly their influence on the internet, where they've almost decimated local news production, so we don't have the Hendon Times as we used to over the past, that has a great deal for it to be responsible for. And also engaging in activities such as Radio 1, where there's many commercial stations that already cover and cater to that market who listen to that kind of music. I think the BBC is too big. It should be a lot smaller. It should focus upon issues of entertainment and particularly education, meaning the news. And I think there will be a role for that. But if people want to experience the BBC, I think it'd be better if they paid for it directly, rather than demanding that anyone, not just people over 75, pay a tax effectively of 170 odd pounds for this year. It would be better if they had the streaming service such as Netflix.
An issue which I imagine will come up, and I just wonder, through the lockdown, through the period of COVID since the end of February, beginning of March, a lot of people who have not necessarily suffered physically, but may well have suffered mentally. What plans are in place to deal with the fallout from the pandemic over the, let's say, the year, in terms of mental health in the future?
Well, I think in regards to mental health, that when someone needs assistance through a professional psychiatry service, it's almost gone too far. And I think before it even gets that, each and every one of us has a responsibility to reach out to our friends, our relatives, even our acquaintances. And tonight is a good example of an opportunity for everyone to come together. And also just to say to people, is everything okay? And there seems to be some kind of movement. I read only today on, I think it was on Facebook, someone said it's okay. I think it was my cousin actually said it's okay not to be all right, but it's you need to ask someone. And I thought this is quite a good initiative. So I think each and every one of us has a role to play to ensure that people are able to express what they're feeling before they get to the stage where they need a direct medical intervention. And when it gets to that stage, I think it's become quite serious. And so just by reaching out to someone to see that they're okay, there also Michael Sheen, the actor, was speaking on Breakfast TV on Monday, and he was talking about the same issue. And he contacted someone as part of the initiative just to find out how people were. And I think people just would like to have a conversation with others able to talk about anything. It doesn't have to be something that particularly worrying them. Just to feel that contact with another human being if they are totally alone. So there's something that we can all do. But the government have invested in mental health services. But I feel that by that stage, there's a lot more that should have been done by each and every one of us.
I think we have a question. What do you think about the UK's voting record recently in the UN attacking Israel? I think that's to do, obviously, referring to Temple Mount.
Well, I think isn't it wonderful that there's so many problems within the world, be it North Korea, be it China, the Uyghur Muslims, problems in Iran, but we can always find time at the UN to criticize Israel, can't we? It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. There's occasions when the government gets it right, particularly if we get to them first, some of my colleagues, and we hound the Foreign Secretary to say this is an issue that you should vote against, you shouldn't abstain, and you certainly shouldn't vote for it. There's been occasions when the Foreign Secretary and the department have actually hoodwinked our representative at the UN, infamously a couple of Christmases ago. But I think it's appalling that there's so many problems in the world, and the amount the number of resolutions against Israel are just totally inappropriate and disproportionate.
Thank you. I think we've reached the point. I said to you we'd be about an hour. I think it's been an hour and 25 minutes. There are no further questions there. I've asked many of mine that I wanted to ask of you. Just to say, Matthew, thank you very, very much.
Not at all.
And being with us this evening. I hope everybody's enjoyed the evening, found it interesting, and obviously your responses. And just appreciate your time and thank you.
Not at all. It is a pleasure, and I'm sincere that it is great to be able to speak to people. There was in the early part of the lockdown, I remember waking up in the middle of the night thinking, you haven't done this, you haven't done that. And I thought, well, no, you can't, because we're in a lockdown. And so it feels an anathema not to be going out to seeing people, to do the things that I do as a member of parliament, which I really like. And talking to people and answering the questions to the best of my knowledge, and certainly to, honestly, the way I perceive issues. I really appreciate it. But I maintain that the issue that you said about mental health, if you can all do one thing today or in the future, just reach out to one person. And I think that would really help lots of people going forward.
Yes, thank you. Before everybody goes, I'd just like to mention next Wednesday night we have Melvin Bentley, Making Dreams Come True. He was the co-founder and director, or is, of Tony Page Limited, the caterer who everybody probably knows, and we look forward to seeing you next week. I'd like to thank everybody who has joined us this evening, and I hope you've had an informative and enjoyable evening, and you enjoyed having a drink with us and maybe some food as well. And thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you again. You should be well, keep safe, and by the time we reach this, it's not far off. Enjoy the weekend, and if we don't see you beforehand, we wish everybody a very happy New Year and a happy Hanukkah, and
Indeed.
Matthew, a happy Christmas as well.
Well, thank you, and a happy Hanukkah to everyone here, and stay safe.
Thank you very much. Good night, Matthew.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Get well soon, David.
Do you want to end it, Phil?